Welcome to Journal Club number 6. I'm Dr. Miller, PhD, doubling up on the credentials to overcome my insecurities. If you haven't already checked out my other videos, educational videos, videos about sets and rep schemes, rants, rambles, which is very common, and even the last video I put up, which was on the new research on fat contraction capabilities. Okay? If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, and smack the bell, because that's important. That's what they say anyway. They in YouTube land that try to help burgeoning young, well, young meaning just starting YouTubers like myself, trying to make a name for myself as okay, whatever. You're more welcome to wait to see if you like this video, to like it. We're off to a bad start, so I'll get to work. I'll get to work here. This study is called The Effects of 3 and 5 Days of Training Cessation on Maximal Strength by Travis et al. And includes two big names in there. Well, there's other ones too. Forgive me if the other authors, not like you're not a big name, but Dr. Mojica and Dr. Stone. So is Eastern Tennessee State University study, at least involved with this study. And obviously a big study in terms of it spans a lot of different universities and so forth. It's published in Journal of Strength Conditioning Research. 2022 is when this was published. This has copyright 2021, so maybe it was 21. I have all these studies on my desk sometimes, and that's 2022. So just making sure I didn't pull like an old study. I got a stack that I've been working through. What's up with this study? Well, it's really interesting. Some powerlifters looked at what happens when you stop training for 3 and 5 days. So 4-week training block, strength block. Let's wait 3 days and see if strength declines. Let's wait 5 days and see if strength declines. Two groups. One group did the 3-day decline. One group did the 5-day decline. Both groups did the same training, 4-week training program. These were trained individuals, 16 males, 3 female. Average age was around 24-ish. These were trained individuals, so in terms of the strength metrics, right? Squat 2 times back squat, 2 times body weight. So yeah, bench 1.3 and deadlift 2.2. So a strong group, especially in the squat, a strong group. I would say they are strength training. Okay, they did have some Wilks scores in these guys, 446 to 434. Not the strongest people in the world, but I would say they're strong. Okay, this was a university powerlifting team. Some of them competed, some hadn't, but they were training like they were. So again, I'm satisfied that they just strength trained individuals. So what these individuals, I'll talk about the outcomes in a second. What these individuals did was a 4-week training program, as mentioned. Your typical powerlifting type of program. They did 4x5 for day 1 and 2, and then 5x3 for day 3. And in the final week, they did 4x5 day 1 and 2. And then they did a 3x1. And then they didn't lift for either 3 days or 5 days. The outcomes that were of interest, body composition. Was there any body composition changes in that short period of time? They had a survey on short recovery stress assessment is what the scale assessment. So looked at stress and recovery, both of those things, the perception of how the individual felt, these two different cessation. And I'll talk about why this study is important in a second too. And then the outcome, so the researchers tracked pre and post cycle 1RM testing for deadlift, squat, and bench, of course. But for the cessation period, so in other words, the 3 or 5 days off, and again, these were two groups. These were split into two groups. These participants, they didn't do 3 and 5. They did 3 or 5. They tested isometric strength. So like the isometric strength in the squat and the deadlift and the bench for the beginning, the end of the training cycle, and then the cessation period. And the idea was, and you have to keep that in mind though, as we look at these results, is they didn't 1RM test and after 3 days off or 5 days off. And the idea was that was just too much for them to do, the athletes. So we can still get a picture if they're, because of the linkage between isometric strength and dynamic strength, that we could still get a picture of what the strength decline was. So what's the point of the study? The purpose, I'm kind of doing things backwards, but that's just the way it works sometimes. That's the way I work sometimes, is when you look at a taper, that's why Dr. Mojica's on here. Dr. Mojica is, I regard him as one of the leaders in tapering, right? His book, maybe I'll do a review on it one day, on tapering, is fantastic. And so, what is an optimal taper? So some powerlifters just take a complete week off between, the end of their program and the taper week and then the competition. Is that a good strategy? Like most things, the reason I brought this study up is the blanket statements. Like, everybody should do this. You should always do this. This is, there's no difference between the squat, dead, and bench, right? As a weightlifting coach, Olympic style weightlifting coach, I won't really have a clean and jerk, at least not a lot of reps, volume builds, volume kills. I won't do a lot of reps, midweek before the meet. But I will do some heavier reps with the snatch because the snatch is more technical. The snatch requires better timing. And so if you go too light, too fast, even though the volume is down, you can lose the feel of the lift, right? Where the clean and jerk is more of just getting it going, right? There's still technique, of course, but that's more fatigue sensitive. Okay, so each lift, I tinkered with this over, when to max out on the clean and jerk for the last time, when to max out on the snatch for the last time, hitting openers, right? I ended up hitting over the years, depending on the size of the athlete too, is clean and jerk openers were Friday before a Friday or Saturday meet, and snatch was Monday before Friday or Saturday meet, just because of the getting legs back. It depends on the cycle, all these different things. So I'm interested in tapering, training residuals. This was of interest to me. So the other part of the body comp was, well, what if, and these guys didn't cut, but how much change is there to fat-free mass potentially with 3 days off, 5 days off? Okay. So again, the outcome was I'm going to read this, short recovery stress scale assessment, body composition, and these isometric assessments, both post training, and then the 3 and 5 days, whatever group it was, 3 days off or 5 days off, no lifting. Was there any drop in strength? The conventional wisdom is that you don't have to lift anything heavy for about 7 days before you start to see losses in strength. Thus the idea that we take a full week off in powerlifting, take a full week off before you actually do your meet, and you'll feel great. Okay. Is that supported though? Is that quote unquote true, according to this study? All right. So hopefully I set that up and you're tracking with what I'm doing here. So first of all, the question is, did these individuals get stronger with this training program? And if you look at the absolute loads, yes, they're all statistically up, meaning the back squat 1RM went from now these are plus or minus like 40 kilos. So keep that in mind. These are absolute numbers, 177.6 to 188. So an added 10 kilos. I'll just give you the difference. About 6 kilos in the bench, about 9 kilos in the deadlift. Okay. And that's in the absolute numbers. In the numbers that are relative, remember the 2 times body weight went to 2.1 times body weight. Bench went from 1.3 times body weight bench to 1.4. And the deadlift didn't see much, 2.2 to 2.2. So much that it didn't make a difference, right? So this program didn't do a good job with the deadlift, but it did do a good job with the bench and squat, and that's okay because those are the 2 outcomes that were assessed. There wasn't anything assessed with the bench, or with the deadlift, excuse me. Now the isometric tests were, put up the bar up against a rail, put some force plates underneath the feet, and put them at 90 degrees at the knee, and then have them push up against that bar as hard as they can, and register the maximal force. It wasn't timed. It was just, okay, you hit force, hit your peak force, excuse me. And so, whenever that peak force was registered, and they said, okay, that's good, you're done, right? And that rep is over. The bench, 90 degrees at the elbow, same thing. Push the bar up against the rail, put force plates underneath, and we can measure what peak force was. Well, I didn't measure, but they measured peak force, that sticking point, right? Hypothetically, these are both the hardest parts of the lift, the most mechanically disadvantaged the individual is. So if we took the peak force assessment pre-training, post-training, and then 3 or 5 days out. All right. So what do they find? The general kind of, so let me get the side ones. Body comp, no significant changes, okay? But if you looked at some of the loss in the 5-day group, there was some loss in fat-free mass. It was not statistically significant, but it was through body water, so not surprising. I just think it's interesting to think about, when you're doing a water taper, or a water cut, whatever you want to call it, that there was almost a kilo lost of body water in this group. Okay, now their total body mass was the same between the 2 groups, but when it came to, in terms of fat-free mass, there was less. There was more of a drop in fat-free mass in the 5-day group than it was in the 3-day group. Okay, that could be from a variety of reasons. It could be nutritional, it could be inflammation, it could be whatever. I just thought that was interesting. There was some loss in fat-free mass, but it looked like it was from more total body water. Like you're not losing actin and myosin proteins within 5 days. Looking at the survey, the stress and recovery survey, no statistical significance. There was some decline, obviously, in like physical preparation, stress, and stuff, but you're just eyeballing numbers here. There was no statistical difference. So why is that meaningful? Because there was no, at least statistically significant, perception of loss of ability, or there was no statistical significance in the 3 or 5 day in terms of feeling less stressed with one or the other. So the perception between the 3 and 5 day was ruled. You can kind of say, well, I'm ruling that out as a factor if there was a strength difference. If the 5-day group said, yeah, I feel less stressed and wonderful, and their scores were significantly different from the 3-day group in terms of, they had higher isometric force output in the squat and the deadlift, then you could say, well, maybe it's because they feel better, right? So that's the whole point of that. But there appeared to be no contribution, at least, that's a bold statement, but at least based on the numbers, there was no contribution of how an individual felt on these outcomes in terms of the isometric performance. Like, that's what we're interested in, is the isometric performance. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Let's get to it here. So remember, the big crux of this was the isometric force, peak force in the squat and in the bench. Okay. And so the 3-day group with the squat saw no significant difference, either up or down. So these, I'm going to just leave out the standard deviations here just to save all the numbers, but 2293 to 2251 was the absolute. When it was force to kilograms, so more relative, it was 120 to 118, right? So no significant difference. What about the 5-day group? Did it make any difference to rest a couple extra days in terms of, was there a boost as a result of doing 5 days rather than 3 and isometric strength of the back squat? And the answer is no. So in other words, with the squat, it made no difference. It didn't make any difference. Now, if you just eyeball these numbers, okay, now it was 120.7 to 118.2 on a 3-day, and then in the 5-day was 107.7 to 108. Now, again, these are small increments, okay? So just take this with a grain of salt, but the trend looks like that the squat is going to improve with more time off. Okay, and I'll summarize here in a minute. I know everybody's going, oh, what? It's shocking. Okay, the bench press though. What about the bench? So in the 3-day, there's no significant difference. So when I'm saying no significant difference, I mean from the end of the training cycle until the measured cessation. So after the cessation period. So for example, with the 3-day group, 1830 was 0.4 was the average force, peak force, and then 3 days later when they measured again, it was 1813. So like in the squat, it was 2293, and then 3 days later it was 2251. And the squat for the 5 days, so it was 2290. Then waited 5 days, measured again, it was 2291. Okay, so I hope that's making sense. I probably didn't make that very clear. So in the 3-day, no significant difference, right? There was neither a loss or a gain in peak force or relative force in the bench press. However, in the 5-day group, this is where I think this study is interesting. There was a significant loss of peak force, isometric peak force. So it went from 2021 at the end of the training cycle to 1973 5 days later. The relative was 93.8 down to 91.7. Again, the standard deviations are close to each other, like in these 2 time points. So, all right. Blah, blah, blah. What does all that say? Okay. It doesn't appear that how somebody feels made a difference. Okay. So the recovery scale, the stress scale doesn't appear to be linked to these results. That's the first thing. Body comp, there wasn't any statistical significance in body comp changes. Okay. Wasn't any statistical significance in body comp changes. Let me back up for just 1 second though, but I think it's worth noting so I don't overgeneralize. There was a statistical significance in muscular stress in the survey when everybody was pooled, okay? So there was a drop in muscular stress, whether at 3 or 5 day compared to the end. So I don't think that's it's statistically significant, but it's not interesting in the study. If there was statistical significance from the 3-day versus the 5, then it'd be interesting. All right, so I just make sure I don't lie here. But in other words, the athletes, these individuals felt the same. Whether it's 3 or 5 day, there's no difference between the two. Body composition, no changes between the two, 3 or 5 day. So there's something else going on here than if we're trying to tease out mechanisms. It could be physiological, it could be neurological, right? The analysis used in the study didn't tease that out, and that's okay. I mean, research is hard. I think this is just interesting. The big takeaway from this, again, keep in mind that they didn't 1RM test. So this was the isometric test throughout, all right? So it's not like we just got to be careful to say, well, the bench needs to be trained dynamically right before a meet, but on the surface, that's what it looks like. So takeaway, squat takes longer to recover. Duh, there's more muscle mass in the lower body, okay? And more muscle mass means more fatigue. So it might be that resting a full week with the squat may be effective. But with the bench, it may not be effective. That there's 3 days, okay, that is a better timing for a taper in the bench than it is for the squat and potentially for the deadlift. They didn't measure the deadlift, so we don't know. Okay, I'm assuming so though, because the deadlift is even, you get more muscle mass, more neurological taxing just as a result of more muscle mass involvement, so on. Now the trick is then, what do you do with this information? How would that taper week look for the bench? I go back to what I said about Olympic style weightlifting. The bench could be akin to like the snatch, where you need to bench midweek before the meet. But remember, volume builds, volume kills, and what holds strength is intensity. So maybe doing a couple sets or 3 sets of 3x2, 3x3 at 85%, maybe, right? Or even 3x1, 85% might be a good idea. You want to make sure you don't accumulate fatigue heading into the meet, but it might be a good idea to give a bump to strength of the squat. And I use the word strength here. Again, it could be neuro, it could be preservation of lean mass, even though the study said there wasn't any loss. But more than likely, just kind of with the snatch, there needs to be some activation that occurs, whether that results in neuro or peripheral adaptations in that short period of time. I don't know, but there's something with the smaller muscle masses of the muscles that are involved with pressing that might benefit from a midweek. And I'm just making up the midweek thing, okay? Maybe it's Thursday, maybe, and everybody's different. That's what I was going to point out. The last part of this is everybody's is different, obviously, and they might respond differently. All right, so last thing here that this, because the raw data was reported, I thought this was really interesting. So each individual was plotted, and this kind of supports what I said about the squat maybe taking a little bit longer as well. When you look at I can't show you the picture obviously because it's copyrighted, but when the squat data, when you look it over, like in each individual, okay, it appeared that individuals that had the 5-day recovery benefited. There was more of them that benefited from that in the squat. Like they saw an increase in strength from the end of the training block to the 5-day period. There was 1, 2, 3, 4 individuals that saw an improvement in strength. So 4 individuals out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 individuals. So 4 out of 10 saw a bump in the squat with a 5-day layoff. The other ones were just either close or down a little bit. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. The 3-day, though, recovery with the squat, there was only, from what I'm just eyeballing bars here, okay, there was only 1 person. Okay, so again, 3-day may not have been enough. In the bench, that's, not surprisingly, this is why it's significant. There was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 people that saw quite a big bump. And these were some of the stronger people that saw quite a big bump in benefit of the 3-day as opposed to the 5-day, where I can't see anybody that saw any benefit from going 5 days with the bench. I don't see anybody that in this list. So the 3-day produced 4 people that saw a bump. There was some that were significantly down still. Well, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to be careful with that word. That were down still, like 5 kilos. Okay, this is the relative scale of newtons per kilogram. Okay, so not 5 kilos in their actual bench, but 5 kilos in this scale that was used. Okay, the point is that there's individual differences. Okay, so you'd have to play around with this. Individuals in the 3-day group on the bench, some of them still were far below, from looking at this and understanding the scale, were far below what they measured post training. Others saw a really nice bump. There was one individual that saw a really big bump. Well, you got to find it for that person. That means you got to try things. So in general, what I would say is try a midweek bench session to try to keep the bench up, or something with pressing, probably the bench. And then just see, right, start low in volume and see if you have a better result. And again, the variables here are going to be how much volume did you use, what was the load used, and then how far out did you do it. And from what I see here in this study, there doesn't appear to be any benefit in waiting 5 days. So it's more of tinkering around with that, with roughly 3 days to see a benefit on bench. Maybe some people need 2. Maybe some people need 3. Maybe some people need 4. Again, could be due to training status and the amount of fatigue accrued. There's so many factors here. Interesting study nonetheless. I hope you found this valuable. I'll see you in the next video.